Hello, everyone. This is Johnnie Alexander. Welcome back to Novelists Unwind. So glad that you're with us. I'm here today with Roseanna White, who is an award-winning, best-selling author. One of her books has been nominated for the Christie Award before. And today we're especially interested in talking about this fabulous book, which I am reading now, An Hour Unspent, which is the third book in the Shadows Over England series. So, Roseanna, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited. This book, it's the first book I read by you, and it is so, I don't even know what to say. It's a complicated story, and it's really, it's so fascinating just to be into the history and into these characters who are so much fun. I sort of am sorry that it's the third book. It's the third book in a series. Now I will tell people you can read it by itself. I mean, I'm reading it and I understand what's going on, but I really want to go back and read the first two novels as well, which are I've got A Name Unknown and A Song Unheard, because it's about this amazing little family of grifters, I guess.
Yeah.
Tell us how, why, and how you ended up putting them in the setting that you did in England, 1914, 1915, that era. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my first series with Bethany House, The Ladies of the Manor, were English set, and they went from 1910 to early 1914 or late 1913. And I realized something big was about to happen to the world right about then. So when it came time to think up a new series to pitch to Bethany, I knew they wanted it to stay in about the same setting. But war was about to happen. So if I kept going chronologically, obviously I'd be getting into the beginning of World War I. And round about that time, I had critiqued a book from my best friend, Stephanie Morrill, who is a wonderful young adult writer. She ended up not publishing this book next, but it was about a girl whose mother was a thief. And as I read it, I was just like, it's so fun to kind of get into how this worked back in the day. And they had their own lingo and language. And it was just like, this could be fun. So I thought, well, what if I had a character who is a thief? Oh, but war's about to start. So how could that play into things? And in my research, I had learned that the King of England actually changed his last name during the war because his last name was German and he didn't want to appear German. So I thought, well, what if we had a character who was German descent and wanted to, distance himself from that? And so as I learned more about how the arts played a role in World War I came up with the premise for A Name Unknown, which was a man of German descent who was a novelist. And then I had my thief character, and I thought, well, how do you make a thief endearing in Christian fiction?
Exactly.
So, this is kind of tricky. So the first thought was, well, you give her a noble reason for doing what she does, and her noble reason was this family. And I thought it would be even cooler if it wasn't a biological family, but if it was just a family they had put together themselves. So it's kind of Dickens-like Oliver Twist. I take my little band of street rats and orphans and I have them adopt each other. So Rosemary in book one is the oldest of the girls in this group. And so then the second oldest is Willa, and she's the heroine in book two. And the big brother of the whole clan is Barclay, and he's the hero in book three. So as I got to know this family, and of course you have to make them huge because that's just super endearing. They were just so much fun to write about. And yeah, I have more stories in my head, but we'll see if they ever make it onto the page.
Oh, I hope they do, because they're just so fun, and you're seeing them now. And I mean, not to be a spoiler, but now in book three, as I'm looking at it, Barclay, he wants to be a Christian. He wants to not be thieving anymore, but he still kind of is, because he's doing it for a noble cause, working for the Admiralty office.
The government, yeah.
Yeah, for the government. So it's government sanctioned theft.
It's not illegal. It's fine, right?
Right. I was just thinking as you were talking, and as I was reading the book, I love the show Leverage. Did you ever watch that? It was about a grifter and a mastermind, and they would do jobs, but for good, to help people who had been harmed by corporations or whatever. So they would So they were the good guys, but they were the bad guys, you know.
Right.
So I was just thinking, this is like Leverage meets Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So, tell us about then the inspiration for Evelina, who's the heroine of the story, because even she is not the typical romantic heroine that you sometimes, expect to see on a page. She's got some different things going on in her life too.
She does. So I was trying to think, because I knew obviously Barclay was going to be the hero of book 3. So who was I going to pair him with? He needed someone super special. So as I was just kind of brainstorming, and I thought, well, I knew what I wanted to focus on was the device, the synchronization gear that allowed aircraft to shoot through their propellers.
How did you even know about that? I mean, that's kind of interesting.
How did I know about that? I think I read about it because I had read, I homeschool my kids. So in reading history to them a couple years ago, I was reading a World War I book to them, and that was one of the things that it touched on.
Wow.
And this was right when I was brainstorming the series, so I photocopied the pages and made notes on it. All that stuff. Okay. All right, so I want to include that. And so when I was talking to my husband about it, who actually has a mechanical mind and I don't, I'm like, I don't know how they did it, but they did something. And he's like, well, it's basically just clockworks. And I'm like, clockworks? Oh, okay. So we could have a clockmaker. That would be so cool because clockworks are so fun. So it kind of in my head turned into, I don't know if anyone has seen The Great Mouse Detective. It's like a Disney version of Sherlock Holmes with mice.
Yes.
But the one that movie has a toy maker, a clockmaker, and he is kidnapped and his little daughter is the one who seeks out the Sherlock character. But anyway, so in my head it was like The Great Mouse Detective is going on. So I knew I wanted my heroine to be the clockmaker's daughter. But I had to make her really strong because one thing that Barclay has always done is take care of people. So I figured, well, what's going to make someone not just be another sister to him? It would be someone who can take care of herself, or at least who really wants to take care of herself. And so I thought, well, what is, the biggest kind of pool of independence of women at the time, and it was the suffrage movement. So I thought, okay, well, we'll make a suffragette character. So I had to read up on that and learn the difference between a suffragette and a suffragist.
That was interesting. I was going to ask you about that because I did not know there was a difference.
Well, in America, it really wasn't. In America, at that point in time, there were no property requirements for voting for men. But in England at the time, there still was. You had to have so much property to be able to vote, even if you were a man. So the suffragists wanted universal suffrage. They wanted it for all men and all women over a given age. The suffragette movement just wanted women over 35 with property to be able to vote.
Wow.
So these are two pretty different things, and some suffragettes would say, oh, well, this is just the logical stepping stone for universal suffrage, but they had no interest really in extending it past themselves. So it was interesting to kind of pit the two against each other a little.
That was really interesting too, as she's sort of working through that and seeing sort of that side of it that doesn't quite go with her ideals and having to figure out where she stands in all of that. And then too, I like how, going back to the clock, how even in your telling of the story, you use phrases like his smile ticked up or his lips ticked up a bit and his heart ticked down. And it's like, so there's all this language going right back to the whole clock thing, and you do that very subtly, but it's like, well, that's really cool. I mean, I could tell you were just very deliberate in your writing.
Yeah, that was fun to do since there was such a language that goes along with the clock making and the toy making that her father does. So it was just fun to pull that in. And the book before it was music was the theme. So there are so many musical words that I could play with. So it's always fun to kind of pull the theme in to the narrative.
Well, you're doing a great job of it. And really, if I hadn't been having my own word count goals that I needed to meet and other kinds of things, I probably would have had it finished, because it's so good. I just want to sit there and read it. Excuse me. Well, talking about words, I read on your website that you are a word nerd. So where does that interest come from, and what does it mean to be a word nerd?
I have just always been really enthralled with the language, and I love, when I was a kid, my mom had her old vintage desk down in the basement. And so I would go down and, I had a list and I would write on it with this old quill pen because I felt like that made me cooler or something. I don't know. I made a list of words I loved. And so when I would go through a book, I would just kind of note the words that I really liked. And I would go down once a week and write them down on this list. So I had this list, quill pen of things, like quagmire, like, oh, that's a cool word.
That is a cool word.
Yeah. So just words I wanted to know more about. And so that kind of was just always a part of me. And then as I got further into writing, there would be occasions where I would look to see if a word was in use yet for the story I was writing. And so when I looked up the history of it, I found all this new stuff that was so much fun. So I started sharing a little bit of it on Facebook, and everyone's like, oh, you should totally do a blog post on this once a week. So I started a word of the week where I look up the etymology and history of a word and its use in English. And I mean, that's been going for like 7 or 8 years now.
Wow.
Tons of fun. Everyone loves it. And yeah, you never run out of words.
No. Never ever. That is so neat. Wow.
Yeah, so the funny thing is now my family is so accustomed to this that they're constantly saying, oh, well, where does that come from? Which came first, this or that? That's your word of the week next week, Mom. So
make it a family thing. About how old are your children?
Zoe is 12, almost 13, and Rowan is 10.
Oh, wow. And you live in West Virginia?
Yep, sure do.
That's cool. Beautiful area. I love driving through West Virginia whenever I get a chance. Are you close to the Blue Ridge?
Where I'm I'm closest to Maryland, like Maryland and Pennsylvania. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I've driven, along that, going to Washington, D.C. from Ohio, and it's, and plus the Blue Ridge. My mom and I used to drive up and down it every once in a while. So I've always loved being able to do that. So in addition to writing, you also design book covers.
I do, yeah.
Wow. Well, and I was looking at that and really focused on, Stephanie Grace Whitson's Keepsake Legacies. And so for those of you watching, Roseanna has a website called, what is it? I want to make sure I get it right.
Roseanna White Designs.
Roseanna White Designs, and she talks about the process of some of these book covers that she does, and it was absolutely fascinating to see how you would take elements, even the lips, you're taking the lips from one person and putting them on somebody else.
Sometimes it's necessary, yeah. When you can't find the right model, you build one.
That was amazing to me, just that whole process, and just the I don't know, just all the decisions that went into making that, those, well, there are three covers for that. And how did you get started in doing that? I mean, obviously you must have an artistic eye. And
yeah, I've always loved book covers. So when I was a kid, I would draw my own, of course, with colored pencils. And so I actually have a series of 5 covers that I made for the first book that I wrote when I was 12. I would just keep designing my own covers in colored pencil over the years. And that eventually became The Lost Heiress, which is my Christie-nominated book. So when you see the final cover that Bethany House did compared to the first one I drew. Yeah, eventually I ended up with Photoshop somehow or another on my computer. So my husband and I also own a small publishing company called White Crime Publishing. So as we had more and more titles coming out, at first we had another cover designer doing the covers, but he had a lot of work and a busy life, and it was often a long wait. So we decided, I'll start playing around. So I played around with covers for years before I started doing it for real, until I got good enough at it, and I really just started studying the covers, and I discovered it uses a different part of your creative brain than writing does. So especially with small children that I homeschool, there are a lot of interruptions, and if you derail my thought when I'm writing, it blows it for an hour, But I discovered that if I'm doing cover designs, they can come over and interrupt, and that's no big deal, and I can look right back and just go, oh, right, resizing. Not a big deal. So it was a way to stay creative in times when I couldn't write. And I found that very gratifying. And I'm sure my family did too, because I get snippy when I don't have time to be creative. So I started designing the covers for Whitefire books in like 2012, 2013, something like that. And so I now design all the covers for Whitefire books. And then a couple years ago, a friend who published a book with us and then had another one coming out on her own asked if I did anything freelance. And so I said, oh yeah, sure, why not? And once people, once I just said, hey, I'm doing freelance book covers, people started coming to me, and most of them were my friends at first, and then people I had never met, and people who just found me online. And so the really cool part is now some of my historical favorite authors like Stephanie Grace Whitson, Lorraine Snelling are now coming to me saying, hey, will you design the covers for my re-releases? And I'm going, I read these books when I was a teenager. This is so cool.
That is really neat. I think that's fun. It's just made that circle.
Yeah.
Who would have thought,
I know. 12-year-old, 13-year-old me never would have believed I would someday be talking to these authors and designing their covers. So it's really cool.
That's so cool. And you've been writing since you were 12, if not younger.
Younger, yeah. I've been writing, I wrote short stories and all from the time I learned to write in pair subjects with verbs. I remember actually the first real short story I wrote on my own that wasn't a school assignment. I was homesick one day at my grandparents' house, and they didn't have television, so there wasn't really anything to do. So my grandmother handed me a stack of old paper and a pen and said, just write a story or something. So I did. I wrote a story about two princesses from Illinois with the S. And they had a magical hair bow. And so, yeah, from there I was just hooked. And so I finished my first novel at the age of 12 to 13. I started at 12, finished it at 13. And I've just been writing ever since.
Oh, that's so cool. When did you, where were you first published? And was that with Bethany House or somebody else?
My first book was with Whitefire, because my husband decided he wanted to start a publishing company. So naturally we had to start with my books. We're not going to experiment on anyone else. So that was first in 2005. We put it out as a hardback, A Stray Drop of Blood. And then I re-released it in 2009 after I had joined a writer's group and learned everything I had done wrong and all that. I re-released it. And so I had 2 books out with Whitefire, and then I actually got a contract with Summerside Press Guideposts for one of their Love Finds You books back in the day. And from that, I went to a 5-book series with Harvest House that had 2 free ebooks in it. And so then from Harvest House, I went to Bethany House. So
quite a story. That's great. That is so cool. So what's next?
Well, currently, now that this series is finished, I'm working on the next series for Bethany House. So it's called The Code Breakers, and it kind of continues with the world that we're already in, but new fresh characters, new fresh plots. So new readers will be able to come to it and not be lost or confused, but readers who have been around for a while will go, oh, I know that character. Just walked over the page. So it actually follows the intelligence of World War I in England. And they had these code breakers in a group called Room 40, because they were in Room 40 of the old Admiralty building. And they actually intercepted and decoded every single telegram that Germany sent. Germany didn't know this, and they didn't believe it even after World War II. It wasn't until everything was declassified, 50, 60 years later that this came out. So some really cool history there that I knew I wanted to share. And so I'll be exploring that through the end of World War I in England.
I can't wait to read those too, because I don't know that much about World War I history, but World War II, I've delved into that and know about, the codes. And again, they were able to get, the English were able to get that Enigma machine, and then they were able to decode everything again that Germany sent, and Germans, and having to make hard decisions. I remember, they knew of a small town that was going to be bombed, or maybe not a small town, a place was going to be bombed, and not being able to do anything about it, because then the Germans would know they had that intelligence. And it's oh wow, to make those kinds of
every decision they had to make, or they made, was based on Is there another way we could have gotten this information?
Exactly.
If they find out we can do it, they're going to change it, and we're going to lose our edge.
Exactly.
So that all got its start in World War I, and it was actually the people who did it in World War I who founded Bletchley Park in World War II.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. I'm really interested because I mean, it's obvious you do a lot of research and you know what you're talking about. It just seeps into your story. So again, this book, An Hour Unspent, Shadows Over England series. You might want to start with the first book in the series, but you definitely want to get to this one because it's really, really good. Love the characters. I just so appreciate talking with you this morning. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much. I do have one last question. When you hit the end, what do you do to unwind?
Usually I have to go clean the house that I thoroughly neglected as I get to the end. So it's like, yay, I'm done. Time to do dishes. Yay. Laundry hasn't been folded in 2 weeks. Yeah, I neglect the housework when I'm writing. So
no, I get that. How long does it take you to write? So I have 2 more questions. How long does it take you to write a book like this?
I generally say active time is 2 to 3 months. So that's, when I'm not procrastinating and doing everything else instead. And a lot of my research will happen before I start writing. But generally, I average about 2,000 words a day. So
good.
2 to 3 months.
That's good. Well, thanks again. I so appreciate it. And one more time, I'll show the book. And it's a beautiful cover. Now, did you have anything to do with designing this one, or did Bethany House?
No, Bethany House has in-house designers. So all I did was tell them what they look like, and clocks have clocks on it. And
An Hour Unspent by Roseanna White. Excellent, excellent book. Well, Roseanna, thanks again. I'm so glad you're here. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. Come back again for Novelists Unwind. Bye-bye.